Hello, and welcome to the very first episode of the Get Your Fix podcast. My name is Vaughn, and I am so excited to be talking to you all today about all things fandom. If you had a chance to check out the trailer, you know that the Get Your Fix podcast is the home base for all of us who are a part of Hyperfixation Nation. Whether you're into bands, movies, books, TV shows, or anything else, this is the place to be, and I am so excited to be starting this project. So this is the very first episode, and I thought what better way to start off with the Get Your Fix concept, if you will, with my very first real fandom. So, when I was really little, I liked a lot of things and I liked them really hard. The very first anime that I saw, I guess if you consider it an anime, is technically Hamtaro. I was super into Hamtaro, super into Zoids. But the very first fandom that I really went all in on was Fall Out Boy. Fandom culture online. I was a huge Fall Out Boy fan. So today we're going to be talking about all things Fall Out Boy and kind of the early 2000s pop punk movement as a whole, the Fueled by Ramen family. So let's get into it. So I first discovered Fall Out Boy from my uncle Chris, actually. So he is super into music. I probably get that from him, to be honest. And he was really, really active on Pandora. And he actually still uses Pandora, which I think is pretty cool. Most people are on Spotify and Apple Music and all, but Pandora is really cool. It was kind of the first music generation platform that I remember where they would kind of do that algorithmic suggestion based on the type of music that you listen to. And he came across the Take This to Your Grave album, Where Is Your Boy Tonight, Dead on Arrival. He showed it to me, and I swear I astral projected out of my body. The sound resonated with me in such a specific way. And this was in 2003. So I was still in elementary school, actually. So I couldn't actually relate to anything they were probably really talking about. The Take This to Your Grave album is kind of a heartbreak album. There's a lot in there about lost love and not really feeling seen or understood. And I think that I kind of always felt that way. I think a lot of people who were into pop punk back in the day didn't really feel seen or understood. And I think that that's what makes it really special. And so I, begged my mom to take me to Walmart so that I could buy the CD. And I listened to it over and over again on the CD player in my room. And I was really hooked ever since. And as I got a little bit older, middle school, I got onto MySpace and I was really into Quizilla. Shout out to anyone that remembers Quizilla. And I was just really saturating my brain with anything about Fall Out Boy that I could find. I was so into it. I, got a huge crush on Pete Wentz really early, which I know is kind of like a milquetoast opinion. I think a lot of people that are into Fall Out Boy are really into Pete Wentz. And there's a lot of discourse online about popular members and things like that, which I'll probably talk about in a future episode, but kind of how I see those parallels showing up in K-pop spaces now, which is really interesting. But yeah, so I was printing out pictures of Pete Wentz and his low-rise jeans at my school library and taking them home with me in my notebook and taping them to my walls. And, in case the FBI is listening, ignore this next part, but, ripping anything that I could off of the music pirating platforms. It was really popular to do that back in the day. And something about the combination of really poetic lyrics with a complex music happening in the background was just unlike anything I'd ever heard before. And there's lots of TikToks being made right now by millennials that I think are really funny of all of our parents kind of freaking out a little bit when we made the transition from boy bands to pop punk. And that was totally me. I was super into NSYNC and Aaron Carter. And then I heard Take This to Your Grave and just became a total scene kid almost overnight. And the online culture around it is so much different than it is now. And it's really cool to kind of see that evolution of fandom online. But I was talking to my friends about it, but back then it really wasn't cool to like pop punk at all. And I remember people were so mean to me for liking Fall Out Boy. And I actually had my first kiss with a guy named Hunter specifically because he was the only boy in my school that also liked Fall Out Boy. And I just remember that being so important to me. Oh, no matter what else it is that you have to say or what you're interested in or your personality, that literally doesn't matter. You like Fall Out Boy, like I'm in love with you. And I remember being like 13 and just thinking to myself, these guys really, really get it. So I thought it would be cool to kind of talk about the history of Fall Out Boy a little bit and kind of lead us to where we are now. And I wanted to start with this episode, especially because there's a new Fall Out Boy album. And it is the 20-year anniversary of Take This to Your Grave, which is the first album that I ever listened to. And so that's 20 years of liking a band. And I know that people, older than me have been liking bands for even longer. I think about kind of like the old head rocker guys who've been into, the Rolling Stones for way, way longer than I've liked Fall Out Boy. But Fall Out Boy really feels like for me, like my generation's like forever rock stars, right? They have an incredible legacy. They've been the soundtrack to so many core memories for so many people. So yeah, so Fall Out Boy, a lot of people probably already know this, but got their start kind of in the Chicago underground scene. Fall Out Boy and kind of were born out of a need to escape the like toxic masculinity of the metal scene, and the harder music scene happening in Chicago. It was getting really violent. And so they wanted to create a softer sound where they could really express themselves. And that really resonated with me as a kid who was kind of struggling with my own brand of masculinity. Like a lot of rock bands, they had some turnover with their drummer. So Andy Hurley was not the original drummer. And on their first album, technically their first album, Evening Out with Your Girlfriend, Andy's not the drummer on that album, which I think is really interesting. And I loved that album too, but I discovered it later. The very first, like I said, the first sound that I heard was Take This to Your Grave. But Evening Out with Your Girlfriend is, I think, a really cool time capsule of like the marriage between the like metal scene, like the harder music scene, and what the evolution of pop punk would eventually be. They're still screaming on Evening Out with Your Girlfriend and Take This to Your Grave, and even on From Under the Cork Tree, which was their second studio album. There's still those elements, right, of like the screaming happening. To me, it didn't really soften into the pop punk sound that we really identify as pop punk today until Infinity on High. And there's a song on From Under the Cork Tree that I think's kind of captured this. That's called "Sophomore Slump" or "Comeback of the Year," and the lyrics are kind of talking about how even back then, before the virality of social media, the kind of temporary nature of blowing up, right? Like you blow up, you get really famous, and then you kind of have to ride that wave, right? And you could ride the wave for longer then. Now the wave is really short. But I really think that they were doing something completely new that people hadn't heard before. And I think that that's reflected in the culture around it. So, kids who liked Fall Out Boy were like picked on, and that's because it was counterculture. And it's kind of hard to imagine now, because I think Fall Out Boy, people have a concept of Fall Out Boy nowadays that is a little bit more commercialized. And, now it's kind of cool to like pop punk music. We have a lot of people in the pop punk scene who are really, really making it out there. Like Willow is doing kind of that emo pop punk sound in her music, and Ian Dior, Youngblood. These are kind of the next gen pop punk folks that I kind of see creating similar sounds. And I really think that it's a bold statement, and I might get hate for this, but that Fall Out Boy were really the godfathers of the pop punk sound that we know today. And so I kind of had a strict mom, so I wasn't allowed to go to concerts at all. Like it was a complete and total no go. I had a strict curfew, and so one of the things that really is probably going to be a lifelong regret for me is that I wasn't able to see Fall Out Boy in concert pre hiatus. And so you know I didn't really get to witness them live until after they came back with My Songs Know What You Did in the Dark. And I feel like the people who had that experience are having such a unique experience that they can kind of keep to themselves forever. Like, that's so special and incredible. Um, So yeah, so then Infinity on High was a really big album. There was kind of the marriage of some of the like hip hop elements too. So featuring black artists who are really popular in the hip hop space. And there was a lot of pushback about that too. People were really freaked out. They were like, "Oh my god, what are these hip hop artists doing on this like weird, like eclectic sounding, you know, sort of boy band, but not really." Um, and I think that that was really cool and amazing. And I think it really speaks to the respect that Fall Out Boy kind of has in this industry. Thanks for the Memories was iconic. Kim Kardashian's in that video. Uh, I remember listening to that album, kind of laying on my bedroom floor, and I like could feel the music like physically moving through me, and it was amazing. And then that brings us to the Folie à Deux album, right? So Folie à Deux was a controversial album at the time, and Pete and Patrick actually just talked about this in a Rolling Stones interview recently with the release of the new album, So Much for Stardust, which was that people nowadays are saying Folie à Deux is their favorite album. Pete kind of said on stage recently at a performance they were doing, kind of like a pre-show performance, that like, let's test that. Like, is that really true? Because at the time, nobody liked that album. They were snubbed by the Grammys. The Grammys has since issued an apology for snubbing that album. But that album, well and truly, it was 2010, and I was a sophomore in high school, and the first time I heard Head First Slide into Cooperstown, I felt like I was just gonna disappear. Like my body couldn't contain how that album made me feel. And I was really, really sad because by then I was on Tumblr, and I entered into my Tumblr Bandom era and made a lot of online friends on Bandom Tumblr. And actually, my fiance and I were both on Bandom Tumblr, and that's one of the reasons we ended up dating. They're more of a Panic at the Disco person themselves, but I remember, like, I was on the live journal, I was reading Pete's stream of consciousness thoughts, I was in the drama with Chris. And I really feel like it was the first time I experienced that like parasocial dynamic of, feeling like you're friends with your favorite artist, which nowadays is kind of like built into the recipe of being a musician. There's whole services you can purchase where you can sign up and get texts from your favorite artists. Um, and a lot of them have YouTube specials and podcasts now. And there is money to be made in cultivating that parasocial relationship, but it really was not popular back then. And being able to like directly speak to an artist that you're a huge fan of on LiveJournal was like bizarre, to be honest with you. And you just didn't have the access to celebrities that you have now. So I was seeing the reaction to Filet à Deux, and people really didn't like it. They didn't like I Don't Care. That single didn't do that well. Um, in the long term, I mean, it exploded when it was first released, but then the album came out way, way too long after that. And by the time the album came out, people didn't like it anymore, and it was really experimental. And at the risk of sounding kind of cliche, like I really just think it was ahead of its time. I don't think people were ready for it. But it's to this day my most played Fall Out Boy album. And I wore that CD all the way out, in my room, in my car. But there was definitely tension. There was like stuff going on in the guys' lives, and we kind of knew that there was not harmony within the band. And so when the hiatus happened, I wouldn't say that I was surprised, but I was heartbroken. I was like, no, a hiatus is a death sentence. Like they're and everyone was saying like Fall Out Boy's over, but I just had so much faith in them as creators, and I really believed that they were doing something that no one else was doing, and kind of like cultivating that space for other people who wanted to make music like them. Panic at the Disco is a great example of that. Cobra Starship was on the Decay Dance label. Like, there really was this like sense of family and camaraderie around trying to do something new and experimental and expressive. Um and that was really important to me, as a young man. Like seeing that kind of example of masculinity was really, really foundational for me, and I really felt like that came through in the Philly I Do album. And the Fueled by Ramen medley on What a Catch Donnie. Oh my gosh, like hearing the I will never I wish I could bottle the way that hearing that song for the first time made me feel and just like take a little hit of it every now and then because it was just so incredible to hear the voices of all these artists that you were already listening to collaborate on a project. So I was really sad when the hiatus happened, but something in my heart knew that they weren't finished. And I was just kind of hoping like that they were working through something and that they would get through it and work it out. And the hiatus era was really interesting because I, like I said, was Pete Wentz kid through and through. But the Black Keys was, to be honest, not my favorite project. And I wanted to like it so bad. I defended it to all my friends. I was like, the Black Keys is great. You guys just don't get it. And it wasn't. And that's okay. But Soul Punk was incredible. And it was a pop album. You know, it was like Patrick kind of stepping out into doing something totally different from Fall Out Boy. It was pop music. And I hadn't listened to pop in a really long time. And I love that album. And there was a time kind of in that in between place where I was like, okay, well, if music like Soul Punk comes out, then maybe I'll be all right. You know, like I will live, you know, I can get with this. I still love Patrick and you know, Pete was still working on the record label and you know, continuing to cultivate new artists, which I thought was amazing. And so I was like, you know, maybe we can live with this. And then kind of flash forward to I'm in college. I'm a freshman in college. I'm sitting in class. I'm on my phone when I'm not supposed to be. You know, it's February 2013 and I get this notification on my Facebook, and I will never forget that it was Facebook because I'm not on Facebook anymore. And it was just a link dropped to a music video, and I was like, "Holy shit, here we fucking go." It's the Renaissance, baby. Like I was so excited and I literally left class and like went home. I and my boyfriend at the time, I was like, Fall Out Boy's back, Fall Out Boy's back. Oh my god. And I just was crying. I was crying because you know, I really felt like my favorite band is coming back. And there are lots of things that are important to me in this life, of course, like my relationship, my friendships, my career, but I care so deeply about the things that I like. And that is the thesis statement of this podcast that these are often driving forces in my life of things that motivate me. They get me up in the morning. I'm so excited when they go on tour, drop a new album, buy tickets, you know, anything like that. And I feel really lucky and grateful to care about something that much. And so I watched the My Songs Know What You Did in the Dark video literally over and over and over again until the Save Rock and Roll album came out. And the Youngblood Chronicles music videos, like having a whole narrative threaded through each and every video that they were posting for the whole album, it was like totally revolutionary to me. You know, I got to see them in concert for the first time at this small venue in Richmond. And I was really surprised that they booked such small venues. You know, because to me, they're like, what other bands are there? You know? But I totally get it in hindsight. Like, they really weren't sure if their comeback was going to be well received or not. And that makes total sense, right? And so I feel like I got a taste of what a pre hiatus concert could have been like. Um, Especially like back in the From Under the Cork Tree era, right? Like Dance Dance Sugar We're Going Down, like that was like the height of their pre-hiatus popularity. It was general admission, so it was a pit, and I, you know, elbowed my way to the front row. It was the first time I had seen any of the guys in person, and that is a core memory for me. Like I will never ever ever forget that a day in my life. It was just so incredible, and I kind of realized that the love that I had for them when I was 9, when I was 13, when I was 16 was exactly the same, if not stronger. And the Save Rock and Roll album hit every note that I wanted it to hit, right? It was a new sound, and that is the thing that I love most about Fall Out Boy is that every album is a new sound, but it sounds like a Fall Out Boy album. You know, they have this really unique identity as a band that when you hear it, you know it's a Fall Out Boy song, even if it's experimental, even if it's a totally different genre, or if it's a marriage of genres or genre bending. I would say each album has its own identity, but it's nestled within the larger identity that is Fall Out Boy. And that is, I think, so difficult to cultivate, especially now, like I said, with like the virality of being online and kind of everyone's pulling inspiration for everyone. And that's how art has always been, right? Like all art is inspired by other art. And Fall Out Boy have shared their inspiration several times, but being able to create your own sound and identity as a band and kind of build a legacy around that is just such a rare thing. And again, in that same Rolling Stones article, something that Pete said recently was that for Fall Out Boy, for their band, an album release should be an event. It should be a really big deal. And I have felt that way about every album that they've put out. It's been such a production in the best way. But I think Save Rock and Roll really captures that the best. It was, they were coming back, they're ending the hiatus. They did a music video for every single song. There's a whole narrative around it, which I just thought was so cool. And that narrative translates in the music. And it was different. There was some more synth in the Say Rock and Roll album. There was the incorporation of some classic rock artists like Elton John and Courtney Love, but also some newer artists like Fleet Foxes, which I thought was amazing, like kind of the marriage of the music industry across generations. And I think that that's something that Fall Out Boy really stands for, is kind of connecting people across generations and being true to yourselves. And so, yeah, that album was incredible. I wore that one all the way out too, and finally getting to see them live was just magical. And so, now we're in that post hiatus era. That's where we're at currently. And this is where we kind of get into the only Fall Out Boy album that I'm not head over heels in love with, which is ABAP, American Beauty, American Psycho. And don't get me wrong, some of my favorite Fall Out Boy songs are on that album. Favorite record, Jetpack Blues, Twin Skeletons, like those songs move me deeply the way that Fall Out Boy songs always do. But there's just something about that album that doesn't quite hit for me. And it's, the Immortals and Centuries, Uma Thurman, it's kind of it's not the sound that I want from them. But that doesn't mean that I don't deeply appreciate it as a piece of art and as a Fall Out Boy album, right? Again, I think it's a little bit experimental. Like American Beauty, American Psycho. I was not in love with it when I heard it, and I worked a coffee shop at the time, and Uma Thurman played over and over and over again. Centuries was an NFL song. Immortals was on a Disney movie. And I just felt like I was having like a different experience. And I also feel like this is kind of where the divide really began between pre-hiatus and post-hiatus fans. And not that there's beef or anything. I actually, this is, I think, really cool. And, I think nowadays in our culture, this might be seen as like cringe, but on Tumblr fandom, Tumblr, if you will, I was a somewhat popular Fall Out Boy blog, not like famous or anything like that, but I had quite a few followers, and I was in this really cool community, and I had made a ton of friends. And there's this account that did Fall Out Boy Bigs and Littles, which I thought was so cool. And the bigs were those of us that were pre-hiatus fans, and the littles were post-hiatus fans, and we were kind of paired together. And we had this really cool experience of like meeting someone who is a post-itis fan who really doesn't know Fall Out Boy like that, was not on LiveJournal, didn't live through the Ryan Ross drama, didn't live through the like Pete Mikey Way drama, like, and really didn't have a sense of what their music was really like when it was coming out. And so I got to make friends with this person on Tumblr, and we chatted all the time. We did like video calls, and I, told her all about, growing up in middle school and high school as a Fall Out Boy fan, and, the MTV performances, like on TRL and all of that, the Pete Nudes scandal, like all of it, right? And it was so cool because I felt like we were kind of living out like that dream with Fall Out Boy of like connecting across generations. am still mutuals with her on Tumblr. And we've both changed our Tumblrs to move on to different things. Like mine is more focused on K-pop, and hers is a Gorilla account now. Gorillas account now. And I think that that's really cool that we're still connected, and that kind of Fall Out Boy brought us together. But what I noticed in talking with her was that ABAP was a really popular album among post hiatus fans. And it was not a popular album among pre hiatus fans. And I just thought that was really fascinating. And even my fiance is a post hiatus Fall Out Boy fan. They really got into pop punk way later in their life. Like they were already an adult when they got into pop punk. And so, they feel differently about that album than I do. And I just think that that's so cool and interesting, like how the culture around it and what your lived experiences are can impact the way that you consume music. And so, but when it came out at the time, I was like, well, I love half of this album. I still love Fall Out Boy, but maybe I'm on the tail end of it, right? Like maybe I am outgrowing this fandom and that's okay. And I can move on to be like a casual listener. That's kind of where I was at because I'd already gotten into K-pop at that time. And I was like, oh, well, I'm going to focus my energy over here. And, I still went to the concert, still saw them live. I loved it. It was still amazing. But it was kind of waning for me a little bit. And I felt like that was kind of healthy. I didn't feel like heartbroken over it. But I was a little bit sad. But, at the same time, it was like, maybe this is the natural order of things. And that was kind of re-solidified for me when Paxam Days came out, even though Paxam Days was like a mixtape. It wasn't like a studio album. And it was purposefully experimental. And I really enjoyed it, but not like as a Fall Out Boy listener. It was kind of like, it's not easy listening. If you've ever listened to Paxam Days, it is not easy listening. And it wasn't hitting those same notes for me that Fall Out Boy hit for me when I was young, right? So I was like, cool, new era, moving on. And then the Mania album came out, and I lost my fucking mind. I actually think that this is kind of an unpopular opinion among pre-hiatus fans. Like pre-hiatus fans don't love the Mania album. But I was in grad school, right? One of the hardest times of my life. I was really depressed in grad school, not sleeping, pulling long hours. And that album was like a lightning bolt to my spirit. Like it reinvigorated my will to live, quite literally. And the aesthetics, like the deep purples, the Romeo and Juliet of the music video of Last of the Real Ones was just like, oh my gosh, it was incredible. Or not Last of the Real Ones, it was Church actually. The Church video was kind of like a Romeo and Juliet vibe. I really feel like it honed back in on Patrick's incredible vocals. And, that's one of the things that makes me love Fall Out Boy so much as well, is that Patrick is, to me, a one of a kind vocalist. He is extremely talented, like the range. And I really felt like the Mania album highlighted that range. And it was, genre bending like they all are, right? I love Bishop's Knife Trick is kind of little bit that smoother, softer, kind of like harrowing ballad type song. And then, again, reincorporating those synths a lot more. And I felt like, okay, here we go, baby. We're back in it. You know what I mean? Like I was totally sucked all the way back in. And when I think about each of these albums, they remind me of the time of my life that I was in when I heard them, and they're so intrinsically linked to my memories at that time, like, and I just, when I hear Mania, I remember how hard grad school was, but I also remember how much easier hearing those songs made it feel. And one of my best friends, Hillary, we met in grad school and we played that album in my car over and over and over again, like in the fucking grad school parking lot with the windows down. It's like 2 a.m. We're exhausted. We're miserable. We, you know, are having an existential crisis. Like, what are we doing with our lives? And we're just like blasting the Mania album over and over and over again. And I'll never forget her favorite song is Wilson. And when I hear that song, I think of her, and I just think that that's really special. And we went to that tour together, actually. So that album tour was with Machine Gun Kelly, and we're both also fans of Machine Gun Kelly, which was really cool. And we got to see them both live and like sing our absolute hearts out until our voices are hoarse, you know? And we still do that now with other bands that we like. And I really got her into K-pop as well. I kind of brought her along with me, but I feel like that kind of first point of connection really was that Fall Out Boy album, and kind of set the tone for our friendship, which is amazing. And then after Mania, what happens next? COVID-19, right? And we were all on lockdown, and it's actually kind of funny to think about because the time between the Mania album and So Much for Stardust is longer than their hiatus was. And Pete said something again in an interview that said, we weren't on hiatus, we were working this whole time. But the pandemic was a really fucked up time. And not to mention the fact that it's still happening, right? I think like for a lot of people, 2020 and 2021 were some of the lowest points in my life. I had gone through a breakup of, a relationship I was in for 5 years. And my whole life was different. Like everyone's whole life was different, right? Like I was furloughed from my job and I was still just listening to Mania over and over again. And I had this really cool experience with my friend Alex, who is also a huge Fall Out Boy fan. And it was during quarantine, and Pete was doing like a late night live where he was just sharing music that he'd been listening to, and how it was getting him through the pandemic, and like how when things are hard, music's always there for us to return to. And again, not to buy into the parasocial of it all, but I felt like I was on LiveJournal when I was 14 all over again. I'm on Instagram. He's just chatting with us, sharing with us what he's been listening to. And I commented in the chat and I said, "Hey, Pete, do you think you could share a playlist for this after the live so that we can download it?" And he read my comment out loud and was like, "That's a great idea. Yeah, I would love to do that. I'll definitely post the playlist." And I like burst into tears because that's like the closest I've gotten to like really talking to him. I mean, I did go to a meet and greet in 2014, which was incredible. And I got to take pictures with them, and I have a signed canvas from them, and I got to tell them how much they changed my life. But it was in a meet and greet setting, right? And you would think it would be more impactful because it was in person, but it was so fast, and everyone around me was kind of having that similar experience. And the security was like pushing us forward. It was, and I was kind of like out of body experiencing that just because I was so overwhelmed of meeting my favorite band in person. Like it was just crazy. But and I'll never forget it. It was at Walnut Creek in Raleigh. And this felt similar, but like more intimate somehow. Like, you know, even Fall Out Boy is stuck in their house, and is feeling that existential dread that we're all feeling right now. And for him to just like sit on live with us and share with us his music, like I remember that being a really impactful moment for me during quarantine where I was like, you know what, maybe we're gonna be all right. And I have that playlist downloaded on my Apple Music and I do listen to it all the time. And it does make me feel closer to him, which I think is really cool. But there wasn't a whole lot of music happening at that time. And then, you know, we're in this era now in 2023 where some people are moving on from the pandemic, and some of us aren't. And it's really, really challenging mental health wise. And I heard the first time I heard Love from the Other Side, I was like, oh, this album is gonna absolutely go the fuck off. And I was really excited because Young and Menace is not my favorite single. And it did make me question whether or not I was gonna like Mania. I was still in that phase of like, oh, am I over Fall Out Boy? Young and Menace isn't like everything. And then that album blew my mind. So thank God for that. But with this album, I heard Love from the Other Side and I was like, oh, this is it. We're once again, not to repeat the same thing, but here we go, baby. We're back. And I love the ways that they're connecting with fans about it. These really small listening parties, playing really small venues with throwback set lists, leaving gifts all over Los Angeles for people to find and like dropping coordinates. Like experiences like that like aren't really that common anymore. And it's so quintessentially Fall Out Boy to like leave a pink seashell at a bookstore, right? And I just was like, you know, I felt again like 16 again in the best way. And some of it's a little commercial, but that's just the gig nowadays, like with the, having to do the template for the album cover where people can put their own pets. And I really have to fight back against my like late 90s, early 2000s like counterculture instincts from like why are we doing like online trends? Like that's so lame. But it's not lame. I think that that's really cool, and like finding really small joys in creating a Fall Out Boy album cover with your own pet. Like that's what a great idea. And they did like the exclusive merch for Heartbreak Feels So Good because when it first uploaded to Apple Music, they forgot to update the title. Apple Music did, and it just said track 2. And so they put in an exclusive Valentine's Day t-shirt that says track 2 on it. And that's so cool. Like, we don't have to be mad about technological glitches, right? Like we can make an experience out of them. I feel like that is really the essence of Fall Out Boy to me, is really connecting with their audience and with their fans, and with young people everywhere who feel like they don't belong places. And I've made so many friends over the years because of Fall Out Boy. All of my best friends are Fall Out Boy fans, and that's really cool, right? I actually wrote a blog about this called Fitness and Fandom on my blog vonreyes.medium.com if you're interested in that. Um, and that is about how music helped me find joyful movement in my body again. I grew up as a fat kid and I really didn't like working out, and it was just like a really stressful thing. And I started going to this spin class in my local spin gym, and my instructor is a huge Fall Out Boy fan, and I was like, "Whoa, that's so cool!" And the first class I went to with her, she played a Fall Out Boy song, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is everything that I've been missing in my life." Like if people just played Fall Out Boy every time I did an exercise class, I would have mad gains. And recently she did an album listening party essentially at spin class. So my spin class is 40 minutes long. The album is 40 minutes without the two speaking interludes, the one from Ethan Hawke and the one from Pete. I got to listen to the whole album in a room full of people who love Fall Out Boy, who love spin, and we got to really, really put the work in while listening to the brand new Fall Out Boy album. And what an incredible, unique experience to have that just feels so special and memorialized to me. Um, and I feel like this album, there's songs about COVID on it and quarantine, about caring about each other. And there's songs about like anti-black racism in this country. Heartbreak Feels So Good is about being black in America. And like that's something that's always been interwoven into Fall Out Boy's music that I think a lot of people don't always tap into, which is that they're always talking about something real and important. Even if it's, your first heartbreak, or, getting cheated on, or, getting in a fight with your parents, which really resonated with me when I was a young person. But, um, there's a lot of political music on Filet Do. They talk about, Desert Storm and $20 Nosebleed. And I think to be unafraid to talk about things in your music that matter and that affect you and affect the people that you care about really resonates with me and is really important. And I don't think a lot of artists are still doing that. I think a lot of artists really tap into their own personal experiences, which a lot of people can relate to, and that is equally as important to me. Sharing the vulnerable truths about your own life is incredible, and it helps people know that they're not alone. Something my dad always talks about, though, is how we're not really doing political music anymore like we used to. And I think that there's some truth to that. I think a lot of artists are doing political music, even if we're not always cognizant of it. And I think one of them is Fall Out Boy. I think that they're always talking about something real. And I there are a few moments in my life where I feel more real than when I'm listening to a Fall Out Boy song. And so I'm really excited to wear this new album all the way out. I'm gonna burn a hole in my phone playing it on repeat over and over and over again. Um, I'm really, really excited to see them twice this year. I'm gonna see them in July and in August. And, the world is a really scary place right now. And the world has been a really scary place for a long time for a lot of people, especially those of us that, experience some of those isms in the world. And one of the ways that I find an oasis is by tapping into how much I love Fall Out Boy and listening to their music and going to their concerts. And going to their concerts with people who love them as much as I do. So I'm going to see them in July with Hillary for her birthday. I'm going to see them in August, my fiance, and my spin instructor is going to be there too at the show in August. And what a cool way to like make a connection in your community. I think that Fall Out Boy is always going to be important to me, and maybe one day I will move out of this fandom space. And it's definitely changed over the years how I engage with it. And I think that that's okay. And I'm gonna just enjoy it for now. And I'm almost 30, and I'm still a huge Fall Out Boy fan. And I have the privilege of living to 30 and not being 16 anymore, and not feeling embarrassed about the things that I like. One of my coworkers is a big Fall Out Boy fan too. Um, and that was really a great way for us to bond, especially in a remote workplace. To me, that's what's really special about Fall Out Boy is the ways that you can connect with other people who love the things that you love, and to relate to them as artists. I also last year had the incredible opportunity to meet Joe Troman at his book tour. This So Much for Stardust era is also talking a lot about mental health and about taking care of yourself, especially when things are hard. So Joe's not going to be touring with them. And I had a little bit of feelings about that, only because every time I've seen them live, I've always been on Joe's side of the stage somehow. And I'm always like face to face with Joe playing guitar, like shredding right in my eye holes, which is so fun. So I kind of feel like he's like my concert buddy. So I'm definitely gonna miss him this year. And because of that, I felt really grateful to be able to go to his book tour and really hear from him directly what the experience was like to start Fall Out Boy. And he talked about mental health. He talked about having a hard relationship with his mom as a young man, and how that was, that's so relatable and something that we don't always talk about a lot. And uh, I read his memoir and I was laughing, I was crying, I was saying, "Hell yeah, man, me too." And at the meet and greet after, when he signed my copy, we had the chance to kind of talk about that masculinity, and he shared about how Fall Out Boy is not like super aggro dudes. Like, they wear tight pants, they wear makeup, I shared with him that it gave me permission to be that type of man too. And I will be forever grateful that I was able to have that experience, and that I was really able to connect with him as a member of my favorite band. And it like brought this like newfound appreciation for me for the whole band, but for Joe especially. And I think it's an incredible example that he's setting to be able to take a step back and prioritize his own mental health and his family. So I'm really excited about this new era that we're in. And, they're all in their late 30s, early 40s. They all have families. They're not the same band that I listened to when I was, 9 years old, listening to my uncle's Pandora, right? And that's a beautiful thing. Um, so there's one thing I can take away from Fall Out Boy is giving myself permission to evolve and to do the things that I want to do and be true to my own creativity and also to my values and my own brand of masculinity. And I can't wait to go on tour. And I can't wait to see what they work on next. So that is my sort of condensed take on Fall Out Boy and my experience with it. And I might revisit them in the future because, like I said, lots of my friends are Fall Out Boy fans. We might dive into a little bit more about Bandom Tumblr later on. But I think I'll leave it here for now, and would love to hear from you if you are a Fall Out Boy fan or a Fueled by Ramen fan, or have adjacents to the Fall Out Boy cinematic universe, if you will. I love to hear about it. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Get Your Fix Pod. You can also find me on my website, getyourfixpod.card.co. That's CARRD. And then if you like the show and you had a good time hanging out with me, hang out with me again. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Turn on automatic downloads. And if you had a good time with me today, you can leave me a review. So that is all for this episode of the Get Your Fix podcast. And I will see you next time. Talk about our next hyperfixation.